Hi, today I'm very lucky to be with Francis Egan, the Chief Executive of the UK fracking company Cuadrilla. He is possibly the world's most optimistic and positive and Teflon coated man. Francis, thank you so much for seeing me today.
You're welcome.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Cuadrilla, just to give a bit of background to our viewers who might not know anything about you? I know about you, but they don't, possibly.
Well, I've professionally, I've worked in the oil and gas industry for almost 40 years.
Yeah.
Joined it in the UK, in London, and subsequently worked in the North Sea, and then moved around the world a bit. I've lived and worked in Australia and Pakistan and the US, and for a long time worked in Algeria.
Right.
And then 10 years ago, I got a phone call from John Brown, Lord Brown, as he is now the ex-CEO of BP, who said he was chairing a little company called Cuadrilla in looking for shale gas in the north of England, and would I be interested in talking to him about being the CEO of that company.
Right.
And at the time, he said to me, it will be mostly drilling wells and fracking wells and testing gas, and there will be a little bit of PR, public relations, and politics. And the rest, as they say, is history. There was very little wells, unfortunately, and mostly PR and politics.
Mostly PR and politics. And Cuadrilla, can you just tell our viewers a little bit about what Cuadrilla
So Cuadrilla
does?
was a startup company started by a number of geologists. The name comes from the Spanish. I can't say it in Spanish. It sounds a lot better in Spanish, but it means a group of guys out having a good time together. I think Cuadrilla is a group together, and they saw what was happening in the US, in the shale industry in the US. They realized that the geology of shale rock doesn't stop at the borders of the US, and that there might be some of it in the UK and Europe. And they were the first to be granted an exploration license to explore for shale in the UK. A very large license in Lancashire, in northwest England, and that's where they started. Before I joined, they had already drilled, I think, 2 or 3 wells before I came on board, and had proven that, yes, indeed, the shale gas is not just confined to the United States. There is rather a lot of it, not just in the UK, in fact, but stretching right across Europe.
Really? Although my understanding, obviously you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's actually quite exceptional, the gas that we have here.
The UK has some exceptional characteristics, not least the thickness of the shale rock in the UK. In the United States, typically shale deposits are a couple of 100 meters thick. In Lancashire, the rock that we were drilling was at least 1 kilometre thick, order of magnitude thicker.
So big difference.
Yeah, very, very big expanse of natural gas. Yeah.
Could you very, very quickly explain what the procedure is, what fracking is for,
So people talk about shale gas. It's actually shale rock. The gas is no different to the gas that you discover flow in the North Sea.
Okay.
There is no difference. In fact, there is no thing really called shale gas. It's just natural gas stored in shale rock. And shale rock is just a type of rock that's been laid down millions of years ago. But the difference between it and classical sandstone is it's got a higher proportion of clay particles, and I'll try not to get too technical, but what that means is it's very hard for the gas to flow out of it. It's what geologists call very tight rock. It's got a lot of gas in there, but you can drill a well into it and nothing will happen because the gas is trapped within the rock. To release the gas, you just inject high pressure water to fracture, to crack the rock, to create little cracks through which the gas can flow. And with the water, you inject sand. So what happens is you inject water at high pressure into the rock. That cracks the rock. You can imagine a stone hitting the windscreen of your car. It's a fracture pattern.
Yep.
With the water, you follow it up with sand, because as soon as you release the water pressure at surface, because of the weight of the rock, it's just going to clamp shut.
Right.
This time it clamps shut on grains of sand. And to a molecule of gas, a grain of sand is like a 6-lane highway. It can flow through. So people hear the word fractures, and of course they conjure up images of great big cracks,
in buildings,
dozens of feet wide. Where actually what we're talking about is a grain of sand with cracks in rock. 1.5 kilometres below the ground.
Right, okay.
But that is sufficient to allow huge quantities of gas. To the extent that the United States has gone from being an importer of gas and oil to being the largest exporter of oil in the world now, purely through this technique.
It's extraordinary. And the process, how long would the process? It's quite a short process.
It's quite quick. Yes, I mean obviously there's a lot of regulations around it, more so probably in the UK than in the US, which takes a little bit longer. But typically, you could fracture a shale well within a week. And then it could carry on producing for 10, 20, 30 years.
So any noise or any potential seismic events, however tiny, that would be contained within that first week?
Yes, for that well. Now you do have to do more wells.
Yeah, of course,
but you for any development, be it a wind farm, a solar farm,
you're going to have set up.
You have to set up.
Yeah.
For a hospital, a supermarket. Of course, there is an amount of disruption. But if you've got no disruption, you've got no energy, no industry, no nothing.
No, absolutely. But once it is set up, it doesn't take up very much space.
Well,
at all, does it?
it's quite small per unit of energy. Shale is vastly better than wind or solar for the amount of energy you would get from, for example, the 4 hectare site we have in Lancashire. You would need a wind farm 1,000 times the size of it to do that. So it's not comparable in terms of land take.
No.
Much higher density of energy per acre of land.
Absolutely, and of course we can store gas, whereas the capacity is not quite there, well, at all for the storage.
Well,
of
that's
renewable
the big issue, as we've seen, just this week. In fact, we've got an installed wind capacity in the UK that is sufficient in theory to meet all our electricity demand. Yet we were having to go and ask people to shut off their fridges, for God's sake.
I know.
Because we can't store it.
Yeah.
And there is no quick solution in sight for that, much less environmentally friendly solution, because lithium batteries, which is the preferred method of storing electricity, requires a lot of mining, and unfortunately most of it is found in China.
Yeah, so it would be completely dependent on China, and of course, whether people believe in CO2 emissions causing man-made climate change or not, the CO2 emissions of not producing and fracking for our own energy in this country causes higher CO2 emissions because we're having to bring it in.
Well, that's the sad but true reality of it.
Yeah, people don't realise, do they?
Well, they don't, and I think in a way the wool is being pulled over their eyes, because most people won't know, probably most of them won't care, but when we count CO2 emissions in this country or any country, we ignore all the emissions that are incurred before any of the energy arrives.
We export it and then ignore it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if we outsource all our energy production to the United States, North Africa, the Middle East, they have to count the emissions.
Yeah.
So we can say we now have no emissions, but actually what's happened is we've just moved the emissions from a highly regulated environment to a much lower regulated environment. So one, there will be more emissions, and two, in transporting the energy thousands of miles from the lower regulated environment, you're creating even more emissions.
It's crazy.
So there's this a global problem that is being addressed by localized fictitious solutions.
And to badly quote you, I think you said the Earth doesn't care where you get your gas from or something. The Earth doesn't care where the CO2 emissions are coming from.
No, I mean, the clue is in the title. It used to be called global warming, but now
it's climate change.
Well, it's climate change, and now you have local councils declaring climate emergencies and emission-free zones. I mean, you at some point you have to understand that the energy supply and demand is volatile price-wise and uncertain, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has highlighted that.
Yeah.
But politicians point to that as if somehow or other that is the root cause for this. Gas prices were rising, oil prices were rising a long time before Russia invaded Ukraine. That merely added some impetus to it.
Absolutely. I mean, in the year before, I think they quadrupled. I know for certain businesses that I'm involved with, the people that are involved in my organisation, that they doubled, quadrupled within the year before the Ukraine war. So it's very convenient for the government with a very clear agenda. Not quite sure what the agenda is, but Nigel Farage in his article recently in the Telegraph touched on the concept of a deindustrialisation agenda, possibly don't know why, that with that particular agenda, then they would be doing things like that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think you're probably giving too much credit to the government.
Oh,
to think
really?
they have an agenda.
Okay, right,
because
okay.
I just detect a complete lack of energy strategy, and I'm not alone in that. I mean, people have been saying that for a long time.
Okay.
I wouldn't go so far as to say they're making it up as they go along, but the level of ignorance that's displayed is frightening sometimes.
I must say, I have found that when I've been talking to members of Parliament, that it's not malicious necessarily, but
No.
just that they haven't been presented with the actual facts, and they're just
But that's perhaps being a little too kind to them, because they might not have been presented with the facts, but who on earth would go about transforming an entire country's energy supply and demand without at least asking what does it cost and what's the benefit?
No, yeah, it's
And
complete
what does it
madness.
cost? Nobody can tell us. The Treasury were asked to analyse what it costs. They produced the usual Treasury report. I don't know how many pages were in it, but you could summarise it with 3 words: we don't know.
We don't know. And of course, Chris Skidmore's report, the whole strategy seems to be about people not living their lives, not actually going out or doing anything or having the heating on or anything at all. And you said before about energy rationing. I mean, how long before smart meters? At the moment, they're going to pay you to turn your electricity off. How long before there's you're being told that it is being told off and it isn't your choice, and poor people can't afford to have the electricity on at the same time.
Who knows? It's entirely possible, and it's not just energy. Of course, the entire agricultural industry of the country is being told that they're going to have to shut down. We're going to have to stop farming. We're going to have to stop eating meat because we can't have cattle emitting methane, It gets lost, I think, in the consideration that the UK produces approximately 1% of global emissions.
Yeah.
So you point that out and people say, okay, fair enough, we should be doing something about it. Don't necessarily disagree with that. But there is an almost cult-like belief that we have to get to zero, and we have to get to zero as quickly as possible. And when we get to zero, the whole rest of the world is going to stand up and applaud and say, wow, we're going to do it too. I see no evidence of that. I see no evidence that China is doing it, no evidence that India is doing it, no evidence that Africa is doing it, no evidence that South America is doing it. There is no evidence that anyone is doing it. And they are emitting the other 99% bar the US and EU of global emissions.
The thing is, the emissions have to come from somewhere for civilization to continue. For us to even think about going to net zero, somebody else has to be doing the emissions. Somebody else has to be producing the electric cars.
Which is what we're doing. Which is exactly what we're exporting our emissions. We're offshoring them. We're taking them off the balance sheet, literally off the CO2 balance sheet, and then we're saying, we're the clean guys here.
It's madness. So going back to what you mentioned earlier about the PR war, was it the former CEO of Cuadrilla? No, or who was it that last year, it was a very senior person that used to work for you, I should imagine, who said, it's not possible to frack and it's unviable. And of course, all the anti-fracking people leapt all over it, the Guardian, everybody.
Yes.
So what was that about? Is he just not up to date with the information? Was he just being a bit naughty? What's going on?
I was suspecting a bit about it. He certainly wasn't up to date with the information. Actually, he was my predecessor.
So he was your predecessor, right?
Well, predecessor bar one. I think he had left. Someone had taken over on an interim basis, and then I came.
Oh, okay.
So he had not been in Cuadrilla for more than a decade. Not involved in any of the recent wells. Not party to any of the knowledge.
Okay.
So one. Perhaps stirring some mischief, and 2, who knows what the other motives were. But I can tell you, we are the only company to have drilled, fracked and flow tested wells in the UK.
Right.
There are a lot of armchair experts sitting in media organisations, academia, houses of parliament, who have the benefit of no data but lots of opinions. We
and
have the benefit
of
a lot of data and facts.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rishi Sunak in the hustings talked about, he was with Kay Burley and she actually challenged him on the fracking stuff, and he said, no, I'm very pro-fracking if it's proven to be safe. And he talked about the BGS report and other things that had come out. What did the British Geological Survey report actually say?
Well, they said 2 things. One, they said clearly that there isn't a level playing field between the regulations that are applied to fracking and the regulations that are applied to other industries, such as geothermal.
Yeah.
And the other thing they said is we need to drill and frack more wells.
Right. Well,
so
that
now we
hasn't
have a
been widely
situation
reported.
where the government's leading technical advisor, commissioned specifically to do the study, have said we need to drill and frack more wells to prove that it's safe. And then you have the government says you can't drill and frack more wells till you prove it's safe. I mean, you couldn't devise a more classic catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
You know, and we find ourselves in the middle. So the government is saying you've got to prove it's safe, and we say, well, your technical advisor says we have to drill and frack more wells. No, you can't do that.
No, you can't do that. An actual catch-22. I was with a geologist that works in your industry yesterday, and he said that much more exploration is needed.
Well, of course.
And it's not being allowed. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
No, it's let's not beat about the bush about it. It's a political decision. It's not based on science or
common sense.
It's politics, and we can argue the scientific merits, and we have argued the scientific merits. We can demonstrate the economic benefits. We can demonstrate the environmental benefits. But for some reason, the politicians
I thought the
don't listen.
government love the science. They always talk about the science, aren't they? Boris is the science, but only when it suits them. Do you think Rishi's scared of all the protesters and everything, or do you think it's much bigger than that?
I honestly
because it is a racket, the renewable industry. You don't get any subsidies, obviously, but they really do. £2 million a day, is it, Drax?
You know, I mean, biofuels as renewable is a whole other subject, and how it was classified. You know, billions of pounds worth of subsidies have gone into that. We have received no government money. The disparity in regulation applied to fracking. Our first well at Preston New Road, the largest event, was 1.5 on the Richter scale. Cannot be felt. Nobody felt it.
It's
impossible
two,
to be felt.
Isn't it? You can feel something. But
maybe above
maybe.
2 you can begin to feel it. Yet we were not able to complete that well because we were above the 0.5 limit, which is, you know...
Do you think it was malicious, the Ed Davey thing? I mean, he has boasted recently about setting the traffic light system so extraordinarily low. It was, you know, that it was almost so he planned it to fail.
Well, I don't know is the answer to that, but I think it's a sad outcome where a country that is sorely in need of gas. I'm not saying that you know we don't need other forms of energy, but if we put it in context, in 2021, wind and solar contributed to probably more like 4% of UK primary energy demand. 4.
Oh, it's not very much.
Now you would never believe that if you were reading, you know, listening to the news, because you constantly hear numbers of 40 and 50%.
Yeah.
That's because people are told about electricity, and a lot of, again, media and politicians don't distinguish between electricity and energy.
Yeah, they just see it as
They just say
energy.
electricity, that's it. So wind is today contributing 50% of electricity demand. Yippee.
Yeah.
But actually, when you look at total energy demand over the course of a year, wind and solar are about 4%. Now, obviously that is going to increase. But to get from 4% to 100%,
yeah.
and you know, gas and oil and a little bit of coal is still 75%.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen unless, you know, it's not going to happen without a lot of pain, a lot of cost, and a lot of people not being able to turn on their heating.
Well, it's an annihilation of most ordinary people's way of life. It really will be. And if you're putting that much pressure on the grid as well, if everything's electric, heat pump, car, if we're having rationing now, what are they talking about?
Well, you have to completely reconfigure the grid,
yeah.
because it's based on, you know, large supplies of gas primarily, coming in at discrete points in the country, be that imported or from North Sea production.
Well,
now
we're
you're
using
going to end up
American
with
frack gas at the moment.
shale gas sent across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So it's going to require billions of pounds of investment in the grid, a long time to plan it and do it, huge disruption to the countryside and people. Well, I can't answer that question.
We don't know the answer to that question. We're constantly being told that wind energy is so much cheaper than any other form of energy. That's just not true at all, is it?
Well, when those numbers are put in front of us, what's left out is the cost of upgrading the grid. The cost of having a complete backup system for the days when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine,
yeah.
and the cost of storing electricity.
Like in February, we're not going to have any wind, and we're not.
There's a cost associated with that.
Yeah,
all of that.
Absolutely.
So if you want to be upfront about it, you have to include all those costs. If you then want to put a CO2 tax on fossil fuels, do that, and then put a cost associated with
yeah.
that. But don't pretend by taking in almost the same way as you remove the emissions and park those offshore, you remove, a huge chunk of the costs associated with renewables, take that off the table and say, now that's better than that. Just forget about all this little stuff over here.
There's lots of hiding and shyster type behaviours and things going on.
Well, I think it's because, people just want to have cheap, reliable energy.
They do.
They just want to plug their iPhone into a socket and know that it's going to work.
Yeah.
Right? That's not being delivered to them.
No.
It's not being delivered to them.
No. And you were talking a little bit more about how unfair it was in terms of the seismic events in 0.5, not really. That's nothing. You can't even feel it at all. Yet that you were not allowed to go above that when you were drilling. Is that right?
We were not allowed to go above it, and anything above 0.5 was characterised as an earthquake.
But when we've got the roads that are being built a couple of miles from your site, I think nearly £300 million being spent on these roads. If they had the same levels, that those roads wouldn't have been able to be built.
Well, you would have no roads. You would have no tube stations in London.
HS2.
HS2 would never get off the starting blocks. If you applied a 0.5 to the construction industry, the country would ground to a halt.
Right.
Yet I remember well on a Saturday morning, BBC Radio 4 had as its lead story earthquake in Blackpool, and I think we were at a 0.6 or something like that.
That's not prejudice at all, is it?
And if we were to apply that standard, we would have an earthquake in London every couple of minutes as each tube train went past Piccadilly.
Yeah, absolutely. The geologist yesterday said to me it's the equivalent 0.5 of dropping a bag of sugar.
Yeah, well, Liverpool University did a study because people don't care about 0.5, 1.5, 2. They're not interested in that. What they're interested in is what's the ground vibration level.
Yeah.
The ground vibration level of 0.5 is equivalent to me sitting down this chair.
Okay, so the Earth didn't move when you sat down on the chair.
I would hope not.
Going back to the, you've had a mad few years, haven't you? Like absolutely insane. So you've had the fracking protesters, who seem to me to be highly organised, like mega level organised, and then you've had the moratorium being put on in 2019, taken off again by Liz Truss, and then 6 weeks later, Rishi, in his second day of office, restoring it as well. The wells were going to be concreted over last year, weren't they? I think that was in March, but
yes.
Then that was called off at the last minute. I don't know if you're aware, but it was me personally and my organisation, Car 26, that did the government petition in February, and we got 20,000 signatures, and I was doing, I don't know if you know, but I was doing quite a lot of media around that time. So anyway, but but seriously, how do you run a business like that? I mean, what confidence can you have in the government when they tell you that you're allowed to do it 1 minute, hokey cokey, in out, shake it all about? I mean, how do you make decisions based on that, and how can you trust decisions that they're not going to be overturned?
Well, with great difficulty, and I think that the bigger issue than just me or Cuadrilla underneath that is investment.
Right.
Pounds or dollars doesn't have a passport. It doesn't care whether it's investing in Britain, whether it's investing in the United States, whether it's investing in Asia.
Right.
And money moves where systems are stable. You don't have to like them that much, but you just have to know what are the rules. So, if you look at somewhere and you think, okay, I can invest there and I can work out what a return is, and I can, make some money for my investors on that.
Yeah.
And the investors are generally just ordinary people investing into pension funds. That's where money or universities investing their endowments are coming here. Our investors are now looking at the United Kingdom and saying, this place is completely unpredictable. We talk about, I worked for a long time in Pakistan, and it was a lot more reliable knowing what the rules were in Pakistan than they are in the UK right now, in the hydrocarbon sector.
Right.
Because you were dealing with a known quantity. As you said earlier, we had the moratorium removed, and then 5 or 6 weeks later we had it reimposed again. We were told it was safe there. 5 weeks later it's not safe. There'd been no fracking in between the two events, so what happened?
No, what happened, and Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss both campaigned during the hustings for the leadership contest on the basis that they would remove the moratorium on fracking. And I know someone who went to a lot of the hustings, and he told me that when they talked about fracking, it got the biggest cheer. So there's massive public support for fracking, there really is. But are you I read last year that you had been in talks with the other company in your space, INEOS, about potentially mounting a legal challenge based on the disruption that you guys had to the government. Is that something that you're still considering? I mean, did you lose money because of their decisions? Are you going to challenge the government on that?
Well, I can answer the one part of that question, and unfortunately I can't answer the other part.
Okay, fair enough, that's fine.
But we have invested hundreds of millions of pounds following government policy. We have followed all the rules, we've complied with all the regulations.
Your eyes are doing a lot of talking at the moment.
And INEOS have done the same.
Yeah, I read something about a 1 billion war chest.
INEOS have put a lot of money into this in good faith.
Yeah.
I won't talk about the legality of it, but I will say we have been treated appallingly. Okay. We have been treated appallingly.
So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that you might want.
Look, we would like
even
to move forward.
A sorry note. So would that be enough? No, probably not. No.
I mean, we weren't even contacted between the first and second
it's
moratorium.
Disgusting, isn't
it? Nobody knew, certainly in our company, or I'm sure in the rest of the industry, that frankly, in response to a parliamentary question, the Prime Minister banned fracking again. I mean, what way is that to treat people who invested hundreds of millions of pounds
and the consumer,
pursuing your policy?
Yeah, pursuing their policies, and also the British consumer. They're people that are paying huge amounts for their energy. Last night, I said last night I went to a soup kitchen place. It's an amazing project called Amazing Grace in Blackpool, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to mention this, but I mean, first of all, there was a huge amount of people there who had come there because they'd chosen to put the heating on, so they come there for their meal. So they had literally made a choice. And I think you made a commitment to the people in Blackpool that they would get some help with their energy costs, and if you've been allowed to frack, so that wouldn't be happening. But the thing that broke my heart was a 19-year-old girl. They do outreach work. 19-year-old girl, small baby. She's working as a street prostitute. She started 2 weeks ago, and it's because she did it to stop the electricity being turned off.
I mean, it's
19-year-old.
Yeah, outrageous.
Sorry.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and you know these stories are frankly only going to get worse. Because
they said they've seen a marked increase in people coming in saying they're making a choice.
Yeah.
People are turning their fridges off. You imagine the food poisoning, potential for little children, babies, milk not being able to be stored properly. This isn't very civilised, is it?
Well, we're at the situation now where the government is having to subsidise energy bills and not doing enough. We as a country and a political class, we used to make fun of Venezuela when they were doing that.
Yeah.
At least Argentina has now got its act together and is developing shale gas.
Right.
So because there is a rich play of shale gas in Argentina, and they're doing something about it. I despair sometimes at our lack of an coherent energy policy.
What would you say to Rishi Sunak right now?
I would say you need to wake up and smell the coffee.
Okay. Because we could have energy security. How could we? Charles McAllister's a colleague of mine, I know he works with you. He told me that within 10 to 20 years, maximum 10 to 20 years, we could be energy self-sufficient if we were fracking.
If we were serious about it, we could. I mean, the United States went through that process, and the pace of development was incredible. You go back 20, maybe 30 years now, and people said this is just a pipe dream. Shale's going nowhere in the United States. But look at it now. They are. If it wasn't for shale gas in the United States, we would be in deep trouble, because the European Union are building LNG import terminals. The UK is increasing its imports of shale gas. So the sad but true fact is there's a lot of shale gas being used in the UK. Unfortunately, we're seeing none of the economic benefit of it because we've exported it all.
And it's completely safe to frack. You had all of that misinformation campaign when we can speculate about who funded all those protesters and people like that, but there's an obvious benefit for certain countries and companies and industries to stop us fracking. But I mean, there's no way that Putin would have been able to invade the Ukraine if we'd been fracking 10, 15 years ago.
Well, the kind of the responsibility of politicians, and in this case I think particularly the European Union, in outsourcing its energy supply to Russia is bordering on criminal. They shut down their nuclear industry. They suddenly find out that their so-called reliant gas supplier is a dictator. So he's gone from being a partner to a dictator.
Oh, he's suddenly changed.
Yeah, who saw that coming?
Yeah,
and now they're reopening lignite coal mines. I mean,
Reality check. So the common argument that a lot of anti-fracking people say is that, it wouldn't be any cheaper for the British consumer because, the price is set on the international markets and there's an international price for gas. And so there's no point fracking our own gas because that's obviously nonsense. But could you explain to me why that's nonsense?
Well, there is no international price for gas.
Right.
If there was, then gas prices in the United States wouldn't be, half or a third what they are in Asia.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason that is it's much harder to transport gas than it is to transport oil. Because to transport gas, you either have to build pipelines thousands and thousands of miles, but more often and in the future, you have to chill it to 160 degrees negative
to liquefy
it, put it on a ship, take it across the
powered
ocean.
By diesel. Is that not right?
Most likely, yeah. And then when you get to the other end, you have to turn it back into a gas again.
So the CO2 emissions for people that are fanatical about all of that kind of stuff are off the Richter scale.
Well, it's going to be higher CO2 emissions, but it's also going to be a lot more expensive because if we were producing shale gas in Lancashire, the pipeline to take it into Blackpool was 100 metres from the site. So we are prepared to liquefy it in the United States, put it on a ship, take it across the Atlantic, bring it into somewhere in Wales, turn it back into a gas again, pipe it up to Blackpool, rather than producing it 500 metres away.
And global CO2 emissions go down by, they don't go down
factor of
at all.
4 compared to
if we
imported
were
LNG.
doing if we were doing it ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's definitely cheaper to produce energy from fracking rather than wind farms. It's interesting actually because Boris is seen as a fanatical greenie, but actually he was the one that stopped the concreting over of the wells, wasn't he, in March last year, ordered the report.
He was in power, and Kwasi Kwarteng at the time was business and energy secretary. He asked for the BGS report. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Which basically said that we need to explore, but we're not allowed to explore.
Yeah. The report said basically we need to drill and frack more wells, and we need to get the data to prove that it's safe. And I think we've discussed the catch-22 situation we find ourselves in.
What do you think is actually going on? Because everybody supports us in being energy independent. The vast majority of people I speak to anyway support fracking. What's the government? I mean, they're not stupid, are they? What is it? The civil service? Is it? What is it? Is it the net zero agenda? A sort of pathological, almost religious fervour about net zero? What's actually going on?
There is a semblance almost of a cult-like status on net zero for some people, but I think underlying it, I think unfortunately there is a lack of scientific awareness amongst very senior politicians about what is and what is not, physically, much less economically possible, and they get sold pipe dreams. They are told, that every house in the country can get its heating from a heat pump, and it won't cost much.
No. Well,
really?
they're 6,000 quid, and apparently they don't get very hot.
Well, you have to completely insulate re-insulate your entire home. I mean, if you get any change out of £20,000.
A lot of our houses are Victorian, aren't they? A lot of our houses are not appropriate to have all that mega level insulation.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bear a lot of scrutiny.
I
don't know, but it's not getting a lot of scrutiny. I think this is the issue. I think it's a classic situation where you start with the answer and then you work out how you get there. It's the inverse of science.
It's the inverse of science and the inverse of common sense.
The common sense is long since departed the room. Yeah.
It's dead. It has ceased to exist.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think that it would be a vote winner for somebody if they were to say, for example, Keir Starmer, he won't, but if they said that they would bring in fracking, do you think that would be a vote winner?
I think, unfortunately, fracking has been demonised through the the media and with a lot of myths associated with it. So I think it would be a big vote winner if someone was to say we are going to develop our own gas supply and it's going to be cheaper and more emission free,
Okay.
which is what it is.
Do you believe in anthropological climate change?
I don't understand enough about the facts or the lack of facts on climate change just to say. I would say the CO2 emissions appear to be rising. The climate has changed, will change. How much of that is man-made? How much of it is just what happens? I certainly don't know.
We should be allowed to talk about it, though.
Oh, well, it does seem to be that you can't say anything about it, can you? You can't say,
No.
well, I'm not sure, I don't know. You have to, sign up and be, fanatical about it. I mean, I would say that most people who do that probably, don't understand the science. I'm an engineer. I have all my career worked in engineering, and when somebody tells you that they can fine-tune a model, to within the second or first decimal point in any system, much less a system as complicated as the climate, my antenna would be raised pretty quickly, and an obvious question will be, well, what's the margin of error around that estimate?
Yeah, and if the margin of error is bigger than what they're actually saying, the increase or whatever is in temperature.
Well, that's one question, and then another obvious question is, well, is this the only way of going about it? Must we put every home in the country through the disruption and cost of pulling out its gas boiler and putting in a heat pump?
For no reason.
What's the cost of that?
Yeah.
What's the benefit of that?
Yeah.
I mean, you saw the same kind of mentality through the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, the modelling.
We're following the science,
Yeah.
the government said.
The science.
Yeah. The science is never settled. That's the whole point about science.
No.
Science is as good as the current state of knowledge.
Yeah.
Which is as good as the scientists, who are producing the current state of knowledge.
And also, if you're only able to be funded, if you're pursuing certain, scientific points. I mean,
we're getting into how much has science been politicized?
Yeah.
It's very difficult for a university that is reliant largely on governments to fund them, not to somehow be influenced by what government policy in a certain area is. But that's way beyond my remit.
No, sorry. So I just thought I'd just drop that in. So what's next for you personally? What's next for Cuadrilla? You obviously feel that there's hope.
Well, I don't know what's next for me personally. I don't know what's next for Cuadrilla.
Are you had enough?
What I'd say to you is the shale gas ain't going anywhere, right?
It's still here.
It's still here,
Okay.
and at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if a government says, "My God, we need some domestic energy."
Right, at some point, like the coal-fired power stations being fired up all over the place. Right, we're nearly done. Thank you so much for your time. Just 5 quick-fire questions for you, and then that's it. So, oh no, you're not going to like this one. Climate catastrophe or no climate catastrophe?
Oh, I never put climate and catastrophe in the same word.
Excellent. Right. Oh, okay. You answered it. Great. Fracking or no fracking?
Oh, fracking,
yeah.
for sure.
Fracking or wind farms?
If I had to choose, I would say fracking.
Excellent.
You can have both, but if I had to choose, I would say fracking.
Excellent. Juicy steak or salad?
Oh, it has to be steak.
Oh, good. You're a man after my own heart. Heat or eat?
You need to have both.
Both.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. You shouldn't be forced to choose between those two things.
Well, we must remember that we have been completely reliant on renewables before, but that was 200 years ago when the life expectancy was 40. So things have improved a little bit since then.
Yes, right.
Because I'd actually be dead. I would have died last year. But anyway, thank you so
You're very
much.
welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's lovely. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.